Hi, everybody. I'm one of the senior UX architects at Puppet, and I work with Beth on reporting tools. And we focused last year on just bringing Puppet's reporting tools on infrastructure performance up to speed. Our biggest tool was the node graph. The node graph allows you to see a visualization of your resources within their class containment and dependency relationships. And this year, I'm very excited. Beth is leading us into the territory of reporting on nodes that are not actively being managed by Puppet.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me? Do I need to talk like this? That's going to be weird. So my name is Beth, and as Verne mentioned, I am the product manager for security, compliance, and reporting. I also work with PuppetDB. I wanted to start off with this slide. This is like a whole bunch of people, right? But the reason for this slide is we have a team that is in Pilsen, in Belfast. We have people in London. We have people who helped us across the United States. We have a contingency in Portland, and we have people in APAC, as well as probably a number of people in this room that helped us via test pilots over the course of us doing development on a step-by-step basis. So it takes all of us to make sure that we're building the right tools for you. So I would strongly encourage you, if you're not part of test pilots today, to sign up and be part of test pilots, because your feedback we take very seriously, and we make changes and corrections based on that. So we don't know what you're thinking, but sending out surveys and having you go through what we have in mind and you saying, oh my God, what the hell are you doing? It's actually super helpful for us, so we don't deliver a tool that is unuseful. So why are we here? We want you to have fewer of these. How many people have tire fires sometimes? Raise your hands. Hi. All right. So while Puppet can't prevent you from having tire fires, what we wanted to do is we wanted to provide you the situational awareness, the insight to understand what is happening, to understand what might be burning. Do you have a tire fire or do you have a campfire? Campfire's a little more cozy. Tire fire, all hell's breaking loose. I can swear, right? Because it's just going to happen. So why is Puppet good for security? Puppet has long been used for security by security people as well as ops people in its existing state before we've gotten to the current release that we talked about today. And that's all well and good. But as I like to say, when things fail, they fail fast and they fail in the middle of the night, which requires you to go and come up with some sort of hack so that you can go back to sleep. Thanks, PagerDuty. So with Puppet, we have the ability to show you your infrastructure as code. We are working on helping to build out the concept of least privilege by growing our RBAC capabilities. We are tracking what has changed and when so that you can help provide that information to auditors and actually track it yourself before you get to an audit situation, as well as enforcing your infrastructure as code, or reverting it back to its previous state, or your intended state, rather. So how is PE helping DevOps and security teams? Is it a tire fire or a campfire? With our current release, we are working to provide you with additional information so that you can make that decision and you can make it more quickly, as opposed to what we kind of have today. In order to do that, we've taken a multi-pronged approach to security. After all, security probably means if I asked about 10 people in this room, you'd give me a completely different definition of what security means to you and what you have to do from a security perspective. So in order to meet all those needs, we needed to take a multi-pronged approach. But before I do that, audience participation. I need to make sure at 2:30 in the afternoon, everybody's awake. Okay? I know, I'm high energy, and I don't even consume caffeine. So who would consider themselves a security person as their main role? Raise your hand. Excellent. As a secondary role, raise your hand. Wow, a lot more hands there. Who has a dedicated security person in their planning sessions? Raise your hand. Not as many. So what I want is everybody to look, keep your hands up. I want everybody to look around and see who is doing this already. That is a culture change. That is a change that Puppet cannot affect. But we understand that that is something that is problematic. If you don't take security considerations at the beginning, you get to the very end and somehow you have to tack something on, you're not going to hit your date. You're going to have vulnerabilities. You're going to have issues. So bringing them into the beginning of the process is, in fact, going to be better in the long run. Now, I understand there's like old guard, new guard, the old guard saying no to everything, and so you're a little hesitant to go to them. But still, talk to the people who raise their hand. They've found a solution. So who has a dedicated security team? Raise your hand. Yes. And who tries to avoid interacting with their security team at all costs? Yes. I think it goes both ways, and that's important. So with that, we have a number of people that have deep, I'm assuming deep knowledge from a security perspective. So with that, so we don't get things confused like environment when we're talking about Puppet, I want to make sure that we level set on the key terms and what I mean when I'm saying something, as opposed to you trying to assume what I mean when I'm talking about something. We're going to start with white hat, black hat. So security is a multi-million-dollar industry. White hat side and black hat side. You got the good guys, you got the bad guys. When I'm talking about things for this particular talk, what I'm talking about is the security and compliance vendors and how Puppet and PE kind of fit into that. I'm keeping it super simple. I know it's nuanced. I know it's more complex than that. We're not going to talk about that yet. Black hat, I'm talking about nation states, the mafia. I'm talking about ransomware. I'm talking about people who don't necessarily have the same set of rules and boundaries. They don't have 100 checklists. They don't have a checklist of 100 boxes and like 50 people that they have to go to in order to make a change. They don't have a security team that says no to everything. They can just do something, get into your system, and you're hosed. Next, existing terminology, vulnerability. A lot of people call them CVEs, and that is fantastic. To me, CVE does not represent how problematic the vulnerability is. A vulnerability means that you have a hole, you have a gap, you have a problem within your system. If you are not taking that into consideration and you're brushing over it, you have left yourself open to a hacker. So, there you go, vulnerability. I'm not going to call them CVE for this talk, but I'm talking about the same thing, just to level set. Unmanaged. So unmanaged is an internal Puppet term, and over the course of the week between when I was practicing my talk and people were like, unmanaged is an internal term, you can't really use it, there was no way that was coming out of my vernacular for this talk. So you get to hear about Puppet terms. Unmanaged. Those are nodes that have an agent, but the resource does not have a manifest. Okay? Events. So anyone who, raise your hand for anyone who started using Puppet pre-2016. You probably know events and the events tab as Event Inspector. Everyone else who started using Puppet in the 2016 version of PE. Nobody? There were hands not raised. Okay, so anyone who maybe didn't raise their hand, you would know that as the Events tab. I'm going to call it Event Inspector in most cases, but I wanted to make sure because there are 3 words that we can use about the same exact thing. I'm talking about one thing, kind of like environment. Last, we're talking about our new terms, which is intentional versus corrective. Verne, during her demo, keynote, talked about the difference between intentional and corrective change. This is the big thing that we're doing for this particular release. That is change, so intentional change is change driven by an update to Puppet code. Corrective change is change made by Puppet to return a system to the desired state as defined by Puppet code We don't like corrective change as much. FYI. White hat stuff. So we're going to go through these 4 things over the course of the roadmap talk that I'm going to go through today. We're going to talk about secrets management. We're going to talk as well about our partnership with Conjure. We're going to talk about visibility into intentional versus corrective change, what we're doing today, and where we're going to start taking that in the future. So just because we have it now doesn't mean that's it. We're going to continue to grow that. We're going to talk about giving you a view of your whole infrastructure. That means your managed, puppetized infrastructure, as well as your unmanaged. So anything that has an agent, so that you have packages, users, groups, and services, we have access to that information, and we can tell if something is changing there. So we're going to talk more about that. And then the last piece is the security company integration. There are security vendors who've been doing this for 10, 20 years. We're not going to catch up. We're not going to catch up in a single release. We're not going to be able to build a whole scanning product in 3 months. So I like to say sometimes that I'm just lazy and that's why I'm integrating, but really we're integrating because there are tools out there that people are already using. You shouldn't be forced to use a different tool just because we decided. The whole goal of all of this and taking a multi-pronged approach is because we know that you have to use 5 different tools, 10 different tools, however many different tools in order to make your security stuff work. That makes me sad. So let's talk about secrets. I'm going to go through this one pretty quick. One of the things that we have provided in the release that we just mentioned today is secrets management. And it's the first part of secrets management. So what this is allowing you to do is it's allowing you to select something. So let's say you use Hyra. And in Hyra, everything shows up as encrypted. You can encrypt everything. It goes into the Puppet ecosystem, and it comes out as clear text in logs, in the PuppetDB, and in the console. So now what you can do is you can select that as being redacted. So it will show up as either redacted or a hash. So we know that there are several things that we need to start doing to tighten up Puppet, just like everyone else has things that they need to tighten up from a security perspective. And this just happens to be one of the first of many things that we're going to be doing. The other thing that we're doing is, again, out of laziness or partnership or because of friendliness, we are working with Conjure. And Conjure has been a tremendous partner for us. And they are a secret storage company. And there are other secret storage companies. And so while we are going to build our own levers to make things easier, so you can use PE in the Puppet language in order to make things more secure or to redact secrets, you will also have the opportunity to integrate with a company that focuses on nothing but secret storage. Make sense? You guys are quiet, so you either bored or you already went to my demo. Here is Conjure and Puppet. So we have Josh, who is here. He talked at PuppetConf last year from Conjure, and he is here today. He also spent copious amounts of time going to a whole bunch of Puppet camps to talk about secret storage and Puppet. Strongly recommend that you go to that booth if this is something that's interesting to you. With that, there's a number of dedicated secret servers and applications that are out there. Conjure just happens to be one that we're looking at integrating. It doesn't mean it's the only one, and it doesn't mean that we're going to stop building out our own functionality as well. And it also doesn't mean that we're going to pick all these things. These just happen to be some of them. So visibility into intentional versus corrective change. How to narrow down what might be burning. That seems kind of important to me. So this is my liquid sunshine loving cat. What she's doing is she is falling off of her cat stand onto a chair to try to collect the sun. What I want is for you guys to have more of that in your life and less tire fire. I think that might be kind of important. I mean, even if you have a campfire, then everyone gets to sit around, roast marshmallows. I mean, that's at least better than a tire fire, right? So what I've heard from several security and DevOps people is that no one is actually building the tools that they need. As a product manager, that hurts me to my core. That means that there is an industry that's been around for 10, 20 years, and no one is actually building the tools that you need. We're not listening. So our goal is to start listening and making sure that we are building the tools that you need. And we are creating an ecosystem so that you don't have to use the 10, 20 odd tools to integrate. They've also told me that nobody cares about your feature the way you do, Beth. What they care about is how much glue they need in order to make something work, which I think is pretty important. So it's great to have something. It's great to have an integration. It's great to have different modules. But the other thing that's really important is to make sure that there's low friction for you in order to get all of that up and running so that you can just go and do your work. Because what you shouldn't have to do is focus on Puppet all day, every day. You should be able to do the rest of your job. And that's what we took into consideration when we were doing this. Make sense? Excellent, you guys are so quiet. We've long been able to show you that you have change, and that is fantastic. So imagine you have 100,000 nodes that you have within your system, and you have gone through and you have updated to the latest Apache version. In the existing state, how are you supposed to know if anything else happened during that time period? It's impossible. That is too much information for you to go through. That is monitoring fatigue at its peak. Peak monitoring fatigue, if you will. So instead, what we've provided is intentional versus corrective change. And what that means is you can see that you have 100,000 nodes that you have actually upgraded your Apache version to, and you'll see 100,000 next to intentional, all things being equal, and that's what you would expect. Well, let's say during that time you have Johnny, who doesn't like following the rules and knows that in 30 minutes, like Puppet's just gonna remediate everything back to its original state. He goes through, he writes something, he sees that everything's there, he walks away from his desk, Puppet changes everything back. You see a corrective change. That's your good actor. He doesn't really mean harm, he's just trying to test something out. He hates the fact that he has to get 100 checkboxes checked before he does something. I get it, I would probably do the same thing. But then you know that that's what happened. In the event of an audit, you can say, hey, here's what happened. We talked to Johnny, it's not gonna happen again. That's what happened on that day. We know what corrective change is. Now let's take it to the other side of the podium, and you have Susie Hacker. And Susie Hacker has gone into the system during this very same time, and she has found an SSL vulnerability that exists and patched it. That's how Susie is going to get into your system, and she's going to poke around and try to get all the relevant information and basically own your system. So from there, you have corrective change, and you have enough information that you can identify that something has happened that is potentially nefarious. Tire fire, campfire. And all of this is part of, so all of this information that I'm talking about now is part of the release that we just announced today. We did announce it today, right? Yes, we did. Okay. With future releases, we are going to.
Certain.
I know. I was like, what day is it? I don't know what day it is. It's kind of like being in Vegas where there's like no light, except there's too much light. So with future releases, we are looking to integrate this with events, Event Inspector, the node graph, the dependency graph, code manager, and a variety of other things, so that you have a complete view throughout your system to understand, so that you can actually take action and not only just identify that something happened, but you can correct it and you can do additional things. Because you want to do all the things. With the current release, we've added 4 statuses for you to search and investigate on. We have corrective and intentional in enforcement or no-op mode. because we know not everybody out there can do everything, run everything in enforcement mode. Sometimes you have to run everything in no-op mode, and you have to wait for your change window in order to make changes. So we didn't want to block anyone from being able to do that. We wanted to provide you that information regardless of what end of the spectrum that you are on. I think at this point now I get to turn it over to you. Sorry, that was like a janky handoff.
Well, I was waiting in the wings. I didn't really know why I was in the wings, but like I don't know where else to sit. So what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about what we're releasing for corrective and intentional change in the release, today's release, and then also what's coming in the follow-up releases. The problem that we had is when we decided that we wanted to start reporting on two types of change, intentional and corrective, we realized that we had two choices. One was to break out the reporting into separate workflows and release one workflow at a time. And the other one was to wait for up to 6 months and release the whole thing at once. So we decided that we'd release them in pieces. The first piece comes out today, and that's a single node-centric workflow. So essentially, if you were at the keynote this morning, I demoed pretty much the same thing. Let's see. This is the overview screen. So for those of you who are new to the PE console, this is essentially your login screen. And at the top, we have run statuses. And as Beth mentioned, we, as of our last release, we're dividing them up so you can see statuses for nodes that you ran in no-op and then also nodes that you're actually running in production. So adding these adding the corrective change status will allow you to filter your node lists down to only nodes with corrective change. Now, I want to point out one other thing. You'll see at the top there's a black bar that says filter by fact value. That's additional filtering that you can apply to these nodes. So say, for example, you come to the console, you see you have like 200 nodes with corrective change, but you know that you probably don't care about all of them. You know that you say care about only your Linux machines. As long as it's a fact and it's stored in PuppetDB, you can, not a structured fact, however, but just plain facts. You can filter on facts, and so you can filter that node count down. So you are getting like some method of reducing the noise right on your home screen. From there, you can click directly into the report. The report has 2 tabs, logs, and then also resource events. So there you can see precisely which resources had corrective change on them and then what the change was. So that's what we're releasing today. Now, for those of you who have used the Event Inspector, you're going to see that we do not include any corrective change reporting in the Event Inspector. That is the second flow that we'll be adding in the release after this. So this is pretty much what I showed this morning. You click on the report, and there you have the details. Now, the workflow that we'll introduce in our next release will include the Event Inspector. So what the Event Inspector, for those of you who are new to it, what this allows you to do is to see activity on your nodes through 3 different prisms. You can look at them through classes, through nodes, or through resources. We place classes at the top because we found that most people want to start with a problematic class or a class they think is problematic. And you'll be able to, the way that you use the Event Inspector now, you'll be able to use it the exact same way. We're breaking out the categories. So events are going to be labeled corrective or intentional. Now, there's another level of granularity here that you will not get in the workflow that we're releasing today, which is this. We assign run statuses based on a hierarchy of events that we identify as fails, corrective changes, intentional changes, or no changes. If you have a node, a run report that comes in, and it has a corrective change on it, but it also has a failure, we're going to mark that as a failure. So when you dig into the node, you'll be able to see that it has corrective changes, but that information will not be surfaced directly on the overview. When we add this reporting to the Event Inspector, then you'll see it right away. Not only that, you'll also see the counts in a table, so it's a little bit easier to scan and kind of prioritize which class has which number of events and which event is affecting the greatest number of nodes. And I think that's the next 2. And Beth will talk about resource reporting, but I have one more thing to add. If you guys have not been to the Puppet test pilots area, there are some kiosks set up with unmoderated testing. There's one called Corrective Change Reporting. I would encourage you to go and try that out, because that is the design that we're working on now for the release after the one with Event Inspector. And that one's going to be resource-centric reporting that'll be surfaced directly on your overview screen. So ideally, it'll allow you just to kind of get an idea of like what's actually going on in the system. You can just bypass diving into the Event Inspector completely and use this reporting to let you know, can I solve my problem going straight from overview to a report, or do I need to actually take a deeper dive into the Event Inspector? So test that out. It's a 5-minute test, and there's a space at the end to provide a comment on whether or not you feel this would be useful to you, or any kind of feedback you have, and that would be incredibly valuable to us. Thank you.
You can clap for her, it's okay. So let's talk about the future. So we've already gone through Event Inspector, and Verne has given you a preview. The amazing thing about that is the team literally on Wednesday, right before I got on a plane, at 7 o'clock in the morning, we went through everything that we've already polished up. So that is our next release, and we have that good to go for you, which is fantastic. We are also going to be making the additions to the node graph and the dependency graph, allowing you to look at intentional versus corrective change, and understand any dependencies as Verne demoed at the keynote. The resource reporting, Verne just mentioned. Test pilots, if you haven't done it, go do it. Yay, we love it. And the last one is essentially unmanaged. I'm not gonna say that whole thing, because that whole thing kind of freaks me out. It's just unmanaged. And do you remember what unmanaged is? Anyone want to do a shout out there? Unmanaged, the example I gave with that is anything that you have a Puppet agent installed, but you do not have Puppet code installed on the specific package, user, group, or service. So perhaps you installed NTP on 10,000 nodes, and that's it, but you have other things associated with it. Everything else associated with it is unmanaged. Today, you don't have visibility into that, do you? No. All you have is your unmanaged. So oftentimes you have to have, as Luke mentioned, the Excel spreadsheet, you have a CMDB program, you have a variety of different ways that you have to track that information. Who wants to do that? To me, that sounds like something I want to like stab myself in the eye with. So now what we are working on is how do we provide you managed, intentional and corrective change, as well as unmanaged change. Obviously, if it's unmanaged, we can't tell you if you intended to make a change or not, because there's no Puppet code associated with it, and that is the key aspect. But what we can tell you is if something within that code changed based on the interval that you have selected. So depending on how big your infrastructure is, depending on what the kind of rules and regulations you have within your organization, you can decide how frequently you want to run that and see what the changes were. The cool part's going to come when I talk about the security stuff, because that's actually like my favorite part, to tie it all together. For those of you who are doing continuous integration and continuous delivery, you get to see things on perhaps a more regular basis. For those of you who have change windows, you might have longer gaps. But the important thing with unmanaged is, let's say you have, again, we take the scenario of Susie Hacker. So Susie Hacker goes in and she picks a portion of your infrastructure that is unmanaged, and that's where your SSL vulnerability is, and she patched that. How are you going to catch that? You're going to catch it because there is a change. There's only going to be one change, because Puppet isn't going to remediate that. We're not going to turn it back to the state it was before. That means Susie owns your system. This way, we have provided you a way to understand, should something have happened, should there have been a change within that aspect of your infrastructure or not. You still have to go through and do manual investigation because we don't have access to that. We are not managing it. But it does give you the ability to understand that if you're having a lot of change that's happening within a particular area of infrastructure, you may want to consider actually puppetizing that aspect or that area next, as opposed to what you were thinking about. So it gives you just different levers to make better decisions, whether or not that's security related or not. So if you know that you have to go through and migrate everything, there's different areas that you can look at and say, hey, we've had so much change over here, and that's because we're just doing a lot of change. But it makes us a little nervous, so let's make sure we puppetize that next so we have that rich data and we can understand if it was intentional versus corrective. Make sense? Tying in vulnerability scanning, or how many fucks do I give about a given corrective change? So all of the things that we've talked about so far seem great. We've provided you situational awareness of what is happening, but could we do just a little bit more? I'd like to think we can. So with the security vendor integration, what that is going to give you is we've talked about providing you corrective versus intentional change. How many people are sick of hearing that at this point? No, because it's awesome. Okay, fine. You back there, I owe you like whiskey or something. So we have been working with Cloudpass on that. They happen to be the first vendor that we are working with from a security vendor perspective. They have amazing APIs, which means that we can more quickly and easily integrate their scanning information, their compliance capabilities, along with our infrastructure capabilities. How awesome is that? So let's take into consideration the case where, so the whole goal with this, backtracked, the whole goal with this is having the ability to take a look at your managed infrastructure and then putting on top of that in a single view any vulnerabilities that you have. Now, we understand there are going to be scenarios where you have a DMZ zone and you can't impact or you can't hit the internet. We know that there's a variety of different structures that people have from a security perspective. And we are looking at taking into consideration all of that. We're not going to have it out of the gate. This is kind of hand-wavy from a timing perspective. But we will be able to start integrating that scanning capability for people who don't have some of those restrictions. I'll call them restrictions. I had other words. And so Cloudpass, what I wanted to make sure that I mentioned with Cloudpass is you're probably thinking cloud, and then you tuned out. If you do not do anything in the cloud, don't do that. They hit the full gamut. That's one of the reasons why we picked them. Not only have they been a tremendous partner for us, they have great APIs, but they can hit any infrastructure, they use containers, et cetera. So we have not limited. That's one of the reasons why we picked that organization, is because they cover it all. We also know that there will be other vendors that people use today. So this is where I'm gonna give another pitch to test pilots. So who's tired of hearing about test pilots? Same guy, you can't raise your hand, I'm already buying you one scotch. So from a test pilot perspective, we send out different surveys that are quick and easy surveys. We also provide you a view into what we're doing and as we're building out new features so that we can start to tweak things, and then we go back to you and say, hey, so we made this change, does this make more sense? And have you walk through it. So test pilots is tremendous because you are shaping the course of what the next release is going to look like. So from a test pilot perspective, I forget where I was going with that, so I'm just going to skip it. So from a security vendor perspective, we're going to talk about, intentional versus corrective, yeah. So from a security vendor integration perspective, what we're going to allow you to do is we're going to allow you to see your managed infrastructure. with a scan of everything that goes on top of it from a vulnerability perspective. How great is that? You can participate, you can nod, you can pretend like you're paying attention and not sleeping. The other thing you can do is for the cases where we talked about unmanaged, and I gave you the example of Susie Hacker and the change that occurred, there you can see if what happened with that change, there was a vulnerability associated with the open SSL that she made a change with. So then you know that's why there was only one change in your unmanaged infrastructure, because she patched it and owns that part of your infrastructure. And then you can take action beyond that, whatever that is in terms of working with your security team. Make sense as to why all of that is like the pretty bow that gets tied on top of everything that we're doing? Awesome. So vendor integration and what that gets you. I talked about most of this. So security company vendor integration, they've been doing this for a long time. There's no point in us reinventing the wheel. So we're going to use the expertise that we have. We actually have Cloudpass people sitting here right now if you have questions for them. And they're fantastic. So we're going to leverage that. From a vulnerability comparison to your PE infrastructure, it allows you one place to see your managed, your unmanaged, as well as your vulnerabilities. Instead of having to have a spreadsheet over here, and then you go to your Puppet console, and then you go over here to your security vendor, and you try to do like this crazy mind meld to understand everything that's happening and where you need to look. We're going to give you that situational awareness and that understanding in a single place. And lastly, easier compliance tracking. So a lot of security vendors, Cloudpass being one of them, have these amazing templates for compliance. You just hit little drop downs, you decide which policies that you want to use, which ones your security teams have done. It's amazing. Then you can do reporting and auditing based on that. I find that to be pretty cool. Summary. Random cat slide. So here's your other random cat slide. So she looks super cute there, doesn't she? She looks like super sweet, but really this is like 4:30 in the morning. The sun came out, it was in the summer, and she was like, come on, play with me, it's time to get up. And I was like, 4:30 in the morning, not gonna talk to you. Which is oddly similar to the situations where if you have vulnerabilities that you need to have patched within your system, it may seem innocuous because you don't have visibility into what's happening, but really there's something nefarious happening. Kind of like that cat. So I've taken you through secrets and what we're doing from a secret perspective. I've taken you through intentional versus corrective change, how we are going to connect security vendor data with your infrastructure data, expanding the view of your infrastructure, whether it's puppetized or not, to provide a complete view into what has changed, because at that point it's change, right? Because we can't always tell. Including vulnerabilities and compliance capabilities. Yes! Didn't I say I was going to stop at 5 minutes before? Okay, so I hope that was helpful and it provides you insights into what we have coming up. We have time for some Q&A if you have that. And I'm going to leave some other talks which are going to be amazing security talks. And I've sort of alluded to a number of the things that these speakers are going to be talking about. So instead of doing a call out every single time, here are some talks you can see. When we upload the deck, you're going to see the Cloudpass information in the appendices. Oh, I took up all your 5 minutes. Now we're at 4:52. All right, any questions? Yes? Just shout.
I don't need a mic. Do you have intentions to...
Oh, sorry, recording.
Thank you, sir. Do you intend to link your change reporting with change management tools, like off-the-shelf change management stuff, so you know it's a purposeful change, so that Puppet and the tool will automatically report it as intentional. Does that make sense?
I think I see where you're going with that. For the moment, we are looking at just your Puppet infrastructure, so we haven't gotten to that part yet. It's something that we have thought about considering in the future, but we're looking at like the next year in terms of that information. But that's a good question, and find me afterwards. I'm going to give you one of my business cards, and you can send me that question. Okay? Anyone else?
I might be the stupid person in the room, but can you go over intentional versus corrective in some more detail? I'm not understanding how you're determining what is an intentional and what is a corrective.
Oh, I could do that. I like this part. So what we're doing now is we've added another field in PuppetDB. When an agent checks in, what it'll do now is report a resource property value. It'll compare that value to the one listed in the last catalog applied. If those are different, it'll mark that as an unintentional change. And that's how, and then when Puppet changes it back, that's how we'll report the next run as showing corrective change. Which also means that if you're not using the console, you can query PuppetDB to get the same information. Does that answer it? Okay.
Oops. See, I knew I would trip, and that's why you took off my shoes. Any other questions? All right, excellent. You're free to go.